Shrapnel tears through the freezing air, finding its mark on a young infantryman pinned down on a jagged ridge. The snow beneath him rapidly turns a deep, alarming crimson. His unit medic is there in seconds, hands slick with blood, frantically applying pressure to a severed femoral artery. But pressure alone cannot replace lost blood, and it cannot sew a shattered vessel back together. This soldier is dying, and the nearest surgeon is 20 miles away. In previous conflicts, this distance was a death sentence. The Korean War presents a geographical nightmare for medical evacuation. The terrain is a brutal, unforgiving maze of steep mountains, narrow ravines, and deeply rutted dirt paths that turn to impassable mud with the slightest rain. A jeep ambulance cannot climb these ridges. Even if one could, the bone-jarring ride down the mountain would easily kill a man clinging to his last pint of blood. The only remaining option for ground transport is the litter bearer. 4 exhausted men must carry a heavy canvas stretcher down slick, nearly vertical slopes while dodging mortar fire. It is a grueling, agonizing descent. A journey of just a few miles can take 10 hours. For a soldier with a sucking chest wound or massive internal bleeding, 10 hours is an eternity they simply do not have. The medics on the ground face an impossible burden. They do everything right. They stop the bleeding, they administer morphine, they bandage the wounds with desperate precision. Yet they are forced to watch their brothers slip away, defeated not by the severity of the initial wound, but by the ticking clock and the impassable earth. The human will to survive is staggering, but it cannot outlast the slow bleed of time. This logistical nightmare threatens to drive mortality rates back to the dark days of early modern warfare. The military medical establishment realizes that if they cannot move the hospital to the front lines, they must find a way to move the casualty over the mountains. The solution does not come from a medical laboratory. It comes from the sky, born of absolute necessity and mechanical ingenuity. A strange, rhythmic chopping sound begins to echo through the frozen valleys. It is a sound that will soon become synonymous with salvation. The military calls it rotary wing aviation, but the infantrymen looking up from their muddy trenches just see a fragile, insect-like machine hovering above the ridgeline. This is the dawn of a new era in combat medicine, a radical shift in how human life is preserved under fire. Enter the Bell H-13 Sioux. It is a tiny, skeletal observation helicopter originally designed for scouting enemy positions and directing artillery fire. It has a distinctive clear plastic bubble canopy, an exposed tail boom, and an engine that sits completely out in the open. It was never intended to be an ambulance, yet desperate military doctors and daring pilots look at this fragile machine and see a lifeline. The immediate problem is space. The bubble canopy barely holds a pilot and a co-pilot. There is absolutely no room inside the aircraft for a wounded soldier, let alone a 6-foot stretcher. You cannot fold a man with a shattered spine into a tiny seat. The engineers and field mechanics face a critical puzzle. How do you transport a critically injured human being on an aircraft that has no cargo hold? The answer is terrifyingly simple. If the patient cannot go inside, they must go outside. Mechanics strip away unnecessary weight and bolt 2 metal racks directly onto the helicopter landing skids. These racks are designed to hold standard canvas stretchers completely exposed to the elements. They cover the wounded with a rigid plastic pod, affectionately and grimly known as a turtle shell, to block the worst of the wind. Imagine being that patient. You are heavily medicated, bleeding, and in blinding pain. Suddenly, you are strapped to a metal rail on the outside of a shaking, deafening machine. You are lifted into the freezing Korean sky, suspended hundreds of feet in the air, watching the artillery flashes below you through a scratched plastic shield. It is a terrifying ride, but it is a ride that leads directly to life. This crude, improvised setup marks the true birth of the medevac system. By strapping patients to the skids of a Bell H-13, the military bypasses the mountains entirely. The 10-hour agonizing crawl down a muddy slope is instantly transformed into a smooth 20-minute flight. This innovation fundamentally rewrites the rules of battlefield survival, proving that the air is the fastest route to a surgeon operating table. Consider a soldier with a traumatic amputation. Every beat of his heart pushes him closer to hemorrhagic shock. On the ground, his medic applies a tight tourniquet, but the tissue is dying and infection is already setting in. Without immediate surgical intervention, the tourniquet will save his life but cost him the rest of his limb, or worse, fail entirely during a long, bumpy jeep ride. The radio crackles, and minutes later the Bell H-13 touches down in a small, hastily cleared patch of dirt just behind the fighting line. The rotor wash kicks up a blinding storm of snow and debris. Medics sprint forward, keeping their heads low, carrying the wounded man on a stretcher. They slide him into the skid pod, lock it down, and give the pilot a frantic thumbs up. The engine screams as the pilot pulls pitch, lifting the heavy load into the thin, freezing air. The temperature at altitude drops well below zero. The patient shivers violently under thin wool blankets, his blood pressure dangerously low. The noise is absolute, a mechanical roar that vibrates through bone and teeth. Yet amid this sensory assault, the soldier knows he is moving away from the killing fields. The danger for the pilot is extreme. These early helicopters have zero armor plating. The plastic bubble offers no protection from small arms fire. When flying low over enemy territory, the pilot is completely exposed, a slow-moving target in a sky filled with lead. Every rescue mission requires flying into the teeth of the enemy, hovering in the open, and praying the engine does not take a hit. Through these harrowing flights, a vital medical philosophy begins to take shape. It is the realization that the speed of transport is just as critical as the skill of the surgeon. If a critically wounded person can reach advanced medical care within a very short window of time, their chances of survival skyrocket. This concept will eventually become known in civilian trauma care as the golden hour. The destination for these flying ambulances is just as revolutionary as the transport itself. The helicopters are not flying to massive permanent hospitals hundreds of miles away in safe zones. They are flying to specialized, highly mobile medical units positioned right on the edge of the combat theater. The air evacuation system requires a receiving end that is equally fast and efficient. These are the MASH units, the Mobile Army Surgical Hospitals. They are a collection of canvas tents and portable generators, capable of packing up and moving at a moment's notice to stay close to the shifting front lines. Inside these tents, some of the finest surgeons in the military wait in blood-stained scrubs, ready to perform complex, life-saving procedures just miles from where the injury occurred. The rhythm of a MASH unit is dictated entirely by the sound of rotor blades. When the chopping noise approaches, the camp explodes into motion. Medics rush to the landing pad before the helicopter even touches down. They unlatch the skid pods, pull the stretchers out, and sprint toward the triage tent. The patient goes from a freezing hillside to a brightly lit operating table in less than an hour. Triage in these units is a brutal, lightning-fast calculus. Doctors must look at a row of mangled bodies delivered from the sky and instantly decide who goes to surgery first. The helicopter delivers patients so quickly that many arrive still clinging to life with injuries that would have killed them on a jeep ride. The surgeons are suddenly faced with complex traumas they have never seen alive before. The physical toll on the MASH surgeons is staggering. During major offensives, the helicopters arrive in relentless waves. Doctors operate for 20, sometimes 30 hours straight, fueled by black coffee and sheer adrenaline. They repair shattered bowels, clamp bleeding arteries, and reconstruct limbs under the glare of harsh portable lights, knowing that the next helicopter is already on its way. Back in the air, the pilots continue to push the limits of their fragile machines. The Bell H-13 is underpowered. When carrying 2 heavy patients on the skids, a pilot, and a full tank of gas, the aircraft struggles to gain altitude. Pilots have to carefully manage their fuel, often flying with just enough gas to complete the mission to save weight, leaving absolutely no margin for error. The bravery of these aviators cannot be overstated. Men like Frank Schaffer pioneer the tactics of mountain flying under fire. They fly into narrow ravines where the rotor blades are just feet away from the rocky walls. They land on jagged peaks balancing on one skid while medics load the wounded. They do this day after day, knowing that a single mechanical failure or a lucky enemy bullet means death. Night flying introduces a whole new level of terror. The helicopters have primitive instruments, and flying through the dark Korean mountains is a deadly game of blind man bluff. Pilots navigate by following the faint glow of rivers or the flash of artillery. Medics on the ground light flares or shine flashlights to mark landing zones, praying the light attracts the rescue chopper and not an enemy mortar shell. Despite these overwhelming odds, the results are undeniable. By the end of the conflict, these fragile flying machines have evacuated over 20,000 wounded personnel. The mortality rate for wounded soldiers who reach a medical facility drops dramatically compared to previous wars. The combination of rapid air transport and forward surgical care proves to be the most effective life-saving system ever deployed in a combat zone. The success of the medevac system in Korea forever alters the trajectory of military planning. Ground commanders realize that morale improves when soldiers know that if they fall, a helicopter will come for them. The sight of a Bell H-13 becomes a psychological anchor for the infantry, a promise from the sky that they will not be left to bleed out in the mud. This conflict cements the permanent bond between aviation and trauma medicine. The improvised skid pods and unarmored bubbles will eventually evolve into dedicated, heavily armored medical helicopters with onboard life support systems and flying medics. But every modern air ambulance, whether picking up a wounded soldier in a desert or a car crash victim on a highway, traces its lineage directly back to those freezing Korean mountains. The challenge of keeping these early machines flying falls heavily on the mechanics. They work through the night in freezing temperatures, patching bullet holes with sheet metal and cannibalizing wrecked choppers for spare parts. Without their relentless dedication, the entire air evacuation system would collapse in days. The mechanics fight their own war against wear, tear, and the brutal Korean winter to keep the rotors turning. The legacy of this era is written in the blood and sweat of the medics who held the line, the pilots who braved the fire, and the surgeons who refused to let death win. They did not have perfect tools. They had raw courage, desperate ingenuity, and a profound empathy for the suffering of their fellow man. They looked at an impossible problem and solved it by taking to the air. The birth of the medevac helicopter is more than a technological milestone. It is a testament to the human drive to preserve life in the very heart of a killing field. When the Bell H-13 first lifted a wounded soldier off a frozen ridge, it did not just shorten a journey. It redefined the boundaries of survival, proving that even in the darkest chaos of war, salvation can arrive from above.